Quick disclaimer, most of my games and videos aren't very bloody or violent, but this one is going to have some over-the-top and comical blood. No jump scares or other horror really, just silly over-the-top blood. Well, it's that time of year again, when the Xander Jam rolls around, but instead of phoning it in with another of my 3000 series, I need to make something decent. I figure if people see me make a good game in a week, it stands to reason I'd be able to make a pretty great game given a full year. And heck, maybe they'll even check out Set of Slide 'em Up, either the game or my devlog series. I just released the first devlog for it, be sure to check it out. The theme for Xander Jam was announced just after my lunchtime. Survival of the fittest. People always say never go with your first idea when you hear the theme, but you know what? My first idea was great and I think it'd be the most fun to make. That idea is a survival horror game with an emphasis on fast and flashy movement, similar to something like Dying Light mixed with Contra. I wanted to have a platformer game where you shoot bullets at huge swarms of bugs, and you have to constantly run and jump away to survive. I've made some notes of things that I'd like to try too, like a lighting system with a flashlight and possibly NPCs throughout the game that tell the story and give you breaks from the combat to help with pacing. So I opened up Game Maker Studio 2 and got started on making a platformer character. Well, that's actually a lie. First, I spent way too long making these menus with transitions and settings. Then I got started on my character. Platformer mechanics at this point are fairly straightforward to me. I've done them time and time again, so I thought about what the best platform games have and added all those things. Jump buffering, dynamic jump height, coyote time, and a double jump. I tried to implement a ledge grab, but there was this bug where you just climbed the wall really fast, and I actually liked it a lot, so I kept it in and figured I could design levels around it. I also changed his double jump to a triple jump, and now he's got some really snappy and responsive controls. I had this idea that the NPCs around the area would tell the story of where you were, so each of them would be dying because they weren't survivors, further reinforcing the theme. I added little text boxes when you got close to these blocks, which at some point I'll replace with real art. This gun I made ended up being a real pain. The easy thing to do would have been to just make it rotate around a single point, which definitely would have been passable for a jam game, but I decided I wanted the gun to float around the characters stretched out the way a gun should be, which of course made controlling the location and the spawn points of the bullets a huge pain. After a good chunk of time though, everything was working well and I had most of my player mechanics implemented. Tomorrow's my daughter's birthday, so I won't have much time to work on all this, but I might at least try to sneak in the enemy character. After a fun day at the aquarium, I was able to get some code written for the enemies. Did you know that you can get an enemy that will navigate himself around a path towards the player in Game Maker Studio 2 with just this little block of code? Sure, it's got a memory leak that will ultimately crash the computer, but the journey towards perfection is a long one, and every path begins at 0. Anyway, problem solved, moving on to bigger and better things. I drew up this little guy on my phone before I fell asleep, and I think he looks pretty cool. This was what I think is going to be my biggest day as far as progress goes, since I had a good chunk of free time in the morning. The first thing I did was say goodbye to my beautiful placeholder art and added the sprites I made for the character and enemy. I also used this art set for the background that I found online for free. Once the art was in, I had a long think about what I wanted to do with the gameplay, specifically how I wanted to handle power-ups in the main game loop. While I haven't yet decided if I want to do an arcade-style game with waves or a linear story, I did make a decision on how I wanted power-ups. I toyed around with the idea of letting you pick up power-ups every couple of waves, but surprisingly, there were a lot of cool abilities I could improve upon. I ended up making 3 different skill trees, one that focused on power and damage, one that focused on player movement, and one that focused on the grenades. Each tree had your standard attack ups, speed ups, critical attack ups that you'd expect in a game like this, but I added in some cool power ups when you level up as well. I should also add that leveling up happens Elder Scrolls style, where you need to move to get agility points or throw grenades to get grenade points. The agility tree is the most basic, where you get the power to eventually quintuple jump and fly around like a monkey with a jetpack. The next one is the power skill tree, and this has a few cool abilities. You increase the amount of bullets you shoot at a time, but you eventually get bullets that pass through enemies, and in the final level, you get bullets that pass through walls. My favorite one by far though is the grenade tree. I purposely made the starting grenade a bit unwieldy and difficult to use so that you'd be really rewarded for giving it a shot. While you get some upgrades that increase explosion radius and damage, you also get an ability to throw 2 grenades at once and then 3 at once. Around level 5, you unlock remote grenades, where you can tap the throw button again to explode them. This makes grenades a ton easier to use. At this point, I need to figure out how I want to calculate health for the player and settle on what I want the game loop to be. On days 4 and 5, I focused on getting most of the levels completed, as well as fine-tuning a lot of other aspects of the game. I added a section where your progress would be blocked off until you killed the enemies in the area, which I think adds a lot of fun to the game. I decided to call the game Bagu and drew up this cool logo on Inkscape. Bagu, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, just means bug in Japanese, which I think works really well with the overly corny B-movie horror tone of the game, similar to something like Anaconda or Chupacabra. I added in an opening menu so players can disable the gore if that's not their cup of tea, but they can also do the sensible thing and turn it way the heck up. It's been a long time since I've tackled blood in a game, and I think this is some of the most fun blood I've done so far. The last time I tried it was in my Resident Evil 2D puzzle game, and that was before I learned how to use built-in particle systems. Those blood particles used up a ton of memory, whereas I really can spawn in thousands of these particles at a time and not even see a bit of slowdown. What does kill the computer a bit is the pathfinding for the bugs. Originally, they checked their path toward the player and rerouted every frame. That made for some really fun and smart AI, but boy did that end up taxing the CPU. I wanted to have the player fight hundreds of these at a time, so I found a clever little workaround. Basically, I use a bit of math to run the pathfinding reroute a lot less frequently based on the number of bugs on screen. It makes it so the bugs are smarter when there's only a couple on screen, but they get big and dumb when there's a bunch, which turns out to actually look awesome since now they stagger in and out in big swarms. All that's left to do now is add in a bunch more levels so the player more or less maxes out their level by the end of the playtime. Okay, I did a bad thing. There's lots of blood. Maybe too much blood. My computer can't handle it, but since I gave you the option to turn it down, maybe yours can? I changed the colors a bit too, so the blood looks a lot better, and I also finished the levels and ironed out some of the controller support, since I think that's the optimal way to play. I published the game on itch and the GXC, and we'll see how it does. One thing I'll say is that in most games I wish I could just ramp up the blood to 11, well, now I have. There is no more blood to be added here. I can sleep peacefully knowing there is just so much blood. Well, that's all for today's video. Thanks so much for checking it out. Feel free to like, dislike, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and always cover your mouth when you cough. Have a great weekend, everyone.